We have assembled a panel of speakers this evening to discuss the events surrounding the formation of the Uluru Statement. Last year, the First Nations of Australia met at Uluru to discuss constitutional recognition. They asked for a constitutional voice in their affairs, to be heard in laws and policies made directly for them. They also asked for a Makarrata commission to facilitate agreement making and truth-telling about history. In October last year, the government rejected the proposal for a First Nations constitutional voice. A joint select parliamentary committee has now been put together to further explore this issue as Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians continue to push for this reform. Tonight you will hear from Indigenous leaders and experts in the field. They will provide some insight into why the creation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart is one of the most remarkable moments in Australia's post-colonial era. Our first speaker tonight is Thomas Mayer. He is a Torres Strait Islander man born and living on Larrakia country. He worked for 16 years in the maritime industry, becoming an organiser and then elected branch secretary of the Maritime Union of Australia in 2010. He was elected as the president of the Northern Territory Trades and Labour Council in 2016, becoming a leader and spokesperson for the Northern Territory Union movement. Thomas has long advocated for the interests of his fellow First Nations people, along with other social justice causes. He is now also an advocate for the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Please invite Thomas.
Thank you. I want to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land, elders past and present. Thank you for the acknowledgement and thank you for the invitation to speak here. I was a wharfie when I was 17-year-old when I first started working, and on the wharf I got a pretty good education about politics from some very colourful people. And I think that was an important start to my journey, I suppose. I got to work with a guy named Brian Manning, who you may have heard of, but if you haven't, Brian was a great leader for social justice. He ran around the bush in the Northern Territory with a portable aerial to get the message out for the East Timorese that were in their struggle with the Indonesian invasion, and he evaded the authorities to let the world know what was going on there. He also was one of the wharfies that didn't hesitate in supporting the Gurindji people in their struggle, the longest strike in history. He would travel down there regularly with supplies that our union, our wharfies would throw in for and help with that long struggle that they had. And for those reasons, among others, the union also had a lot to do with the fighting against apartheid in South Africa. The seafarers had banned any ships taking oil to South Africa to support that struggle and put some pressure on. For those reasons, and I've got a lot of pride in being a unionist. On the wharves, I learned a lot about the importance of unity. I was there as a wharfie in 1998, the Patrick's dispute, when the government colluded with Patrick's to remove unionised labour from the wharfs around the country. I remember I was driving to work in the morning and listening to the radio, and the radio reporter said, all the wharfies in the country have been sacked, and I thought, geez, I haven't got a job anymore. But it was our unity that got us through that. We stuck together, we fought it out, and there was also the lesson that unity is more than just a slogan that you beat your chest about on the stump, but you actually have to go out there and work for unity. It takes consensus building, it takes sacrifice. That structure is so important. In 2010, I became an official of the union. And with the support of the members, I was able to continue that tradition of not just fighting for our own wages and conditions, but helping society and the worse off amongst us. I went to a rally It was organised with only about 48 hours notice. A young woman named Jessie Bonson organised it over Facebook. I saw the call out for support, and we lent the PA system. And I went to that action, and there was only about 30 of us there. It was around the WA community closures, if you remember that fight. And so when I was there, I said, geez, you know, we need to do more to help out here, you know, we have to step up. And so using the organising expertise, you know, that I learnt on the wharf and as an official, we made sure that the next rally that happened in Darwin around the WA community closures issue was the biggest rally that we'd seen in Darwin for a long time. We marched up Mitchell Street to Parliament House. We organised several powerful speakers, and we were part of that National Day of Action, not just a few of us, but you know, around 600 of us. And I also helped to organise the reaction to the disgraceful treatment of youth in detention, the Don Dale. And through this activism, getting people on the street, the hard work of trying to get people to turn up again to the next rally, to the forum, you know, I realised something was missing. Something was missing for the way that we advocate for our people. And it was good timing, because it was about that time that I was invited to be a facilitator for a Darwin dialogue on constitutional recognition. Now, I hadn't been involved in the debate around constitutional recognition before this, but I was inspired. You know, I knew something was missing and I was looking for something bigger. And I accepted the invitation, and as a facilitator, I went to Melbourne for a trial dialogue. It was a trial dialogue testing out what was going to happen, you know, these dialogues that were to happen. And there were 5 facilitators and 2 co-chairs in each region that came together to test out. Megan Davis, Professor Megan Davis, led the design of the dialogues. When I was there, I learned more about what was to come. There was to be 12 dialogues originally. Canberra was added on later on. There were to be 3-day dialogues. There would be experts there to answer our questions straight away about technical things. There was lessons about the Constitution, our political system. Rachel Perkins made a 15-minute film about the history of our struggle that went from colonisation to all of these moments of hope, aspirations, dashed against the rocks of political expediency. We'll learn about all those things, the other things that we've proposed, that, you know, those probably hundreds of recommendations from expert panels and committees that have never been enacted. And that these dialogues would elect delegates to come together in a really sacred place in the country, the centre of the nation, the heart of the nation, Uluru. And in my mind as a unionist, I was thinking, what a great opportunity. This is power building for our people here. This is an opportunity for a consensus, for unity. And so nervously I stood up, and I was nervous because these were elders, you know, that I saw on NITV and read about, you know, people like Arnie Pat Anderson, John Christopherson, you know, these wonderful elders. And I asked the question, I asked, has there ever been this opportunity before for our people? You know, these dialogues all around the country, covering the whole country and adjacent islands, well-informed, well-resourced, culminating in this big meeting in the heart of the country. And the answer was no. I had to pull out of being a facilitator because I'm the branch secretary, and I still am the branch secretary of the MUA, so our national council was to fall on the same dates as the Darwin Dialogue. Fortunately that got moved, but I'd pulled out of being the facilitator. I volunteered though to continue to help with the invitations. Just on that, the invitations, there was to be about 100 each for these dialogues, and with a formula applied, because you couldn't just have an open invite, right? This is something that Megan Davis understands as the first Indigenous person elected to the permanent forum at the United Nations, you know. If you have just open invite, you have too much risk of a particular interest group dominating the entire thing, so you must apply a formula to these dialogues. You also have to strive for balance of, like stolen generations, gender. So I volunteered and helped to get the invites out there and all that. But fortunately, the dates of the National Council were moved and I was able to attend as a participant. Part of that formula was 60% traditional owners from the region to make sure cultural authority was there. When I went to the dialogue, I saw what was a pattern that happened in all of the dialogues, I'm told, that on the first day there was this real tension, because there'd been this discussion about constitutional recognition for around a decade before, where John Howard and Tony Abbott had said that we should have a preamble to the Constitution and have some poetic words and that'll get that job done. The Recognise campaign that did a good job of raising awareness about constitutional recognition, but was not asked, there was not a question to our people in a process like this before that, which made it really problematic. So this tension was there and people were strong on, wanting the truth to be told, and that played out in all of the dialogues. And I was elected to be one of the delegates to Uluru. And when I went to Uluru, this same tension played out there as well. There were some of our people that were there to protest, because they thought that this was recognised still, that this was a conspiracy. And it was really high tension. It was a tough convention. And on the second day, that built up to the point where around 20 of our people walked out. And they walked out into a media scrum. And they said that they weren't heard in there. They used, whatever leverage they could get to get their point across because they weren't supported by the majority inside. But that was their right. I don't hold a grudge. We have differences of opinions. We are not a homogenous people. And they made sure that their voice was heard. But the really important thing about that was what happened next. And what happened next was, with low morale, because it was tough, our brothers and sisters walking out and saying some things, but around 250 of our people remained and continued the rest of that day of discussions. And they turned up in the morning. And Professor Megan Davis read the Uluru Statement from the Heart for the very first time. And in that moment, it was something that I will never forget. It's something that has driven me on this journey that I'll tell you about. When she finished the last words, the entire room stood as one, and they endorsed the Uluru Statement from the Heart with standing acclamation. Not one person remained seated in that room. It was endorsed with standing acclamation. So when it was endorsed with standing acclamation, it was read one time. And I'm sure, you guys have developed a document with more than one person, drafted a document. Can you imagine that? 250 of our mob from all around the country, bringing all our, this is the other thing about the tension. We come from so many different places. We're damaged in different ways. We're in different stages of healing. We've experienced, heartbreak and disempowerment, yet we still managed to pull this off. And the most amazing thing about that moment was that I was one of the last to stand. I was just in shock. I'd made a speech not long before that about strategy and unity and all that sort of stuff. And I was one of the last to stand because, I couldn't believe what was happening. And I looked around the room and I saw people that had been in passionate debate against each other. Differences of opinions. Passionate debate against each other, embracing each other with tears in their eyes. There were tears of joy and hope. Now that is so significant in our nation's history. I'm a wharfie, I'm not an academic, but you know, I've spoken in front of a few academics now, and the constitutional experts call that moment a constitutional moment. That sounds pretty wonderful to me, you know, but nothing can beat being there for that moment. And you know, this is the convention here. You know, we had a massive Torres Strait Islander flag on one side, our Aboriginal flag there. If you get a chance to have a look at this photo more closely, you'll see some people that you will recognise, you know, if you've been involved in Indigenous affairs. There are people there, these weren't people that would have the wool pulled over their eyes, you know. These were people with strong opinions, with a lot of experience. This is the Torres Strait Island crew. You know, there were youth. There were all these variety of perspectives that were at this convention. And this is what it is. It's the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And this amazing artwork that you see here, that was by these women. The main artist is Rini Kulicha, Anangu woman. And this is only last week. They had an exhibition, they have an exhibition still going in Sydney. And they were so inspired by the Uluru Statement's travels that they named this exhibition Heart Listening. The artwork, I sat with Rini and got more detail about what this means. You know, it's the different song lines that intersect and come together at Uluru. And Rini explained that in the middle here normally would be Uluru. And so the significance of that was putting this wonderful consensus in the middle, the joining of our song lines. The signatures that you see around here, those are the people that were there in that moment of endorsement. And I want to acknowledge and pay my greatest respects to one of the comrades that was there, Sol Belair. I met him at Uluru, and he was a wonderful, wonderful man that supported this. And I acknowledge that family is here. We put our names around that. It was just a blank canvas then. There was the pencil marks there. We all put our names, and then the artwork was done. And if you go to the website, One Voice Uluru, there is a photo of the woman painting this in the red sand with Uluru in the background. It's an amazing photo. And then last of all, Rachel Perkins organised for this to be printed in the middle, the Uluru Statement. Now this is a really important document. I travelled with it for 14 months. I left it in a hotel lobby once. And so it was a great responsibility. In the hotel lobby, luckily I always stay in the same place in Sydney. And they said, "Did you forget something, Thomas?" I was on my way out to dinner. And I said, no, I'm in a hurry, I've got to... They said, "What about that tubular thing that you carry around?" Oh, geez. It's gone on the wrong plane before and all that. But it's travelled the country and done quite a bit of work in building up support. And it's resting now as much as possible. You know, it's limited engagements now because it's just so valuable. But the valuable thing about this is not the artwork. You know, it's wonderful, it's compelling, it's beautiful, it means a lot. It's not just the artwork, it's not just those people that were there or these beautiful words. It's what it seeks to achieve. It's how it can improve things. Now, I'll read the Uluru Statement so you can understand just exactly how compelling those words are. We gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This, our ancestors did, according to the reckoning of our culture from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land or Mother Nature and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes who were born therefrom remain attached thereto and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise? That a people's possessed the land for 60 millennia and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionally, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are alien from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people to take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our own destiny, our children will flourish, they will walk in two wells, and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is a culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future based on justice, better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967 we were counted. In 2017 we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. That's the Uluru Statement. So the Uluru Statement calls for three things. Put simply, voice, treaty, truth. The voice is called for as being constitutionally enshrined. I talked about those lessons that we learnt. We must learn from our history. We considered what happened to ATSIC, our last representative body, how it was struck out too easily by John Howard with the support of the opposition leader Mark Latham. We cannot let that happen again. Our hearts and souls were poured into this document, to this moment. And if we build this thing, if we have a people's movement that builds this thing, we must ensure that it isn't so easily removed. How can a First Nations voice be unapologetic if there is a risk of that happening again? How do we get a continuation of building our people, our youth, into these structures and really influence the decisions that are made about us unless we do that? And so the importance of the voice in people considering this stuff was that we need to affect the decisions that are made about us before they're made. We considered the other proposals of the past, such things as changing the race power or a non-discrimination clause, in the Constitution. And what was wrong with those as far as priority go? I mean, and I'm sure all of those people would agree that those are things that we need to do. But we prioritised affecting the decisions that are made about us before they're made. If we were to change the race power, it's something that is important for us to do, but you would still need a head of power to have beneficial legislation for Indigenous people. If we had a non-discrimination clause or a beneficial for Indigenous people instead of a race power, then we would need to take that to the High Court. We would need to wait for a bad decision, take it up in the High Court. That would take time, that takes money, and you would still be uncertain of the outcome. And so people leant towards rebuilding a representative structure to affect the decisions that are made about us, and protecting that structure so that it can evolve and be effective and make politicians bloody uncomfortable so they don't make the terrible decisions that they've made to date. The Makarrata Commission is where the truth-telling and agreement-making sits. We didn't take this opportunity, this unique opportunity, to call for treaty alone. It seeks to put something behind it. As a union official, I understand that a commission, an umpire, a place to go to at points of dispute, a place where you can go to protect what you agree from being undermined, and then that voice also being a part of that. That's what we have done, that's the importance of that. The truth-telling, as I said, it was so strong in all of the dialogues. Truth-telling was called for. And truth-telling is already happening. But with the Makarrata Commission, that truth-telling can be done in a much more well-resourced way, in a coordinated way, and it should be going right down to the roots of where these things have happened, to the local basis. Because people want others to know about what's happened to their families, what's happened to their clan, So that's the Makarrata Commission. The voice is also extremely important to truth-telling. Because it's one thing to say what the truth is, it's another thing to be able to use that. It's another thing to make people listen. The voice on treaty making, the treaties are being made with the states at the moment, First Nations in the states, such as in Victoria. But the Commonwealth has an obligation. And so how do we as First Nations have unity to be able to sit with the Commonwealth and work out what their obligations in this are, And for the territories, where I'm from, the Northern Territory, there's a territory power in the Constitution. And so any agreement with the Territory government can be undone far too easily. After this, there's Rini. The first place I saw this statement was at Gama. And that's the first time I touched up on the stage there. There's Auntie Pat Anderson on your left. And at Gama, I could tell that the support of the politicians just wasn't going to be there. Malcolm Turnbull was gifted some words by the Yolngu people, and he spoke those words eloquently, but then everything else after that was empty. And so I was lucky enough to be given the opportunity to travel the country with the statement. And the union supported me in doing that. They funded my travel, they seconded me to the movement, and I just went around the country to try and explain to people what happened and why this is so important, and that continues today. First place I took it to was Gurindji country, the Wave Hill Walk-Off anniversary. I retain a relationship there, because of that connection from back in that struggle. And I sat overnight with the elders, and Rob Roy here, who has a microphone, explained what it was about. And the next day at this ceremony, the beginning of the Freedom Day Festival, they call it, they had a strong endorsement, a strong resolution saying they joined the voices of the Yolngu people, the voices coming from Uluru, to try and see this happen. There we are on Gurindji country. I went to Yule River in the Pilbara. That's the Yule River Bush meeting. Same thing. What I saw there was an amazing thing. The Yule River, the Pilbara tribes came together and were discussing a voice for the Pilbara. And so it was really easy for me to explain when I had my opportunity to speak that this is something that we're doing nationally as well. And so the voice of these nations in the Pilbara can join with other nations and have this influence on the things that are being decided about us. That's at Yule River as well. This is at Kagari, Fraser Island. So I just travelled everywhere with this. This is Alice Springs. That's Woodford near Brisbane here. So I didn't only talk to mob, I didn't only go to communities, I also went to conferences. I've been, as a left-wing militant unionist, I've spoken in front of the Business Council of Australia, universities, insurance groups, you know, everywhere I go and I explain this as I've explained it to you, people get it and the support has grown. But at the same time, Malcolm Turnbull, when he was Prime Minister, and the government support waned and disappeared, if it was ever there, and they dismissed it in October last year. But we didn't take no for an answer. And we continue to travel with the statement. And as the statement says, you know, we invited people to join a movement. We've had some small successes. Turnbull originally didn't want this on the terms of reference for the Joint Select Committee that is considering this right now. But our momentum saw that change. The Joint Select Committee had an interim report mid this year, and our pressure, around 400 submissions, great majority in favour of the statement and the voice, turned the Joint Select Committee to the voice. And so their last set of deliberations has been about the voice and how that can be achieved. Now, we're a long way from achieving this. We do not have enough of a movement. And when you think about the importance of the movement, think about this as an example. Bob Hawke promising treaty. I think if there was a stronger people's movement to keep our politicians accountable to the promises that they make, we wouldn't have had so many broken promises. Consider this as well, the statement, you heard the words. This isn't like other statements and petitions that have been directed to a queen or a king or to Parliament and a Prime Minister. This statement is written to you, to the Australian people. We learnt that lesson as well. We can't put our faith in politicians. We need a people's movement. So what's next is that we continue this fight. There is some information that I'll have up here later on that you can take a photo of, please, and take it away and register on www.onevoiceuluru.org so that I can communicate with you as we take certain actions. Just last week was a week of action, so the Anangu woman there, Rini Kulitzer, and that was the launch of that week of action, the Heart Listening exhibition. And we need to make the politicians uncomfortable. Right now, the current situation is that the coalition has rejected it and are continuing to lie that this is a third chamber to Parliament that we're talking about here. It's wrong. It won't have a right to veto. We considered our obligation to our people and didn't call for something that was frankly impossible in this current political climate. It seeks to take the step towards structured unity. He also said that the Australian people wouldn't support it. And we're going to prove him wrong, right? I know because of these travels that he's wrong. Talking to good people, left or right. And there's been polls done. I think it was Griffith that did a poll, omni-poll, that indicates, you know, that the support can be there. And so, thank you for listening to me. And please, do what you can to support us. Thank you.